Innovative educators with Brooke Folgers. Find community, find strategies, find hope. Before we jump into today's podcast, I want to give a little bit of context. This podcast, I talk about how do we talk to kids about things happening in the world, the hard things, the big things that stir up emotion. And I want to give a little bit of context to the things that I suggest. For some of us, in some contexts, it is not the easiest to just jump into a conversation. Hey, kids, I know that this thing happened today or yesterday. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we're feeling. Ideally, we get to a place with our students, with our confidence and skills as a teacher, with our classroom community, that we can do that. But sometimes that is just not possible. Sometimes it's the start of a school year when something big happens and we've barely gotten to know our kids' names. Some of us now are in very polarizing schools and communities where doxing is a real fear. There are a variety of different things happening in a variety of different places. And sometimes we just need some starter moves. Today, I'm offering the starter moves, the moves to get you confident in talking to kids about the hard topics. And at this point in the school year, if you have been feeling that you need to be able to talk to kids about the hard topics, about the things happening in our world, and don't quite know how to do that, these are great ways to start doing that. The most important thing for us to do is to acknowledge it and give space for kids' feelings. We cannot ignore the state of the world, the wars, the violence, the atrocities that are happening in our kids' lives, in our communities every day. So I offer these as the starter moves, the moves for maybe unsafe or unskilled classrooms where student safety, student emotional safety has to take the place of the let's get right to it and talk about how we're feeling conversation. The other note I wanted to make is I mentioned a picture book at the beginning of this episode, and you'll hear me say, insert title here. I'm inserting the title here at the beginning. The picture book I reference is called Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, The Courage to Dream by Fredrick Joseph and illustrated by Nikkolas Smith, which takes place in the world of Wakanda and is about a girl who is disabled and her dreams of being a wonderful inventor in Wakanda. It's one of my favorites. You should check it out. Today's podcast is a car podcast. I'm driving home from work, and once again, it's another week starting out in public education with a major global event having happened over the weekend. When things like war and violence, when death from racism, homophobia, all those horrible things happen, it is inevitable that they then bleed into our schools. And the biggest question for us as teachers is, what do we say to students? The easy road is to not acknowledge it, to claim that we don't talk about politics. And I think there are a lot better excuses than that if we have to use an excuse. And I don't think talking about major global events, major tragedies is political. It is simply human. Our students are watching these things play out daily, hourly, by the minute on social media, in the news. Their families are talking about it. Their friends are talking about it. And some of the probably least prepared teachers are talking about it. So claiming that school is not a place to talk about it just doesn't hold up. But how do we talk to kids about these things? How do we talk to kids about things like a war breaking out? For me, in my context, It's the conversation of how do we talk about a war breaking out in the home country of some of our students. And that is not a light topic. So today I wanted to consider some ways that we can talk to kids about it. And I'm doing this on my car ride home because I think that for a lot of us, the commute to and from work is where some of our deepest and darkest thoughts about education and our students occur. Whether it's driving to work, dreading something, or driving home from work, wishing we could have done something differently, or commuting home from work, wishing we'd said a thing when we hadn't. Those first moments of our day before the school day and those first moments after the school day can be some of the most mentally exhausting. So, what are some ways that we can address these big things that are happening to the world, to humanity with our students? Well, first, let's talk about why it's important to address them. For some students, school might be the only place where they have difficult conversations or the only place where they can learn to have those difficult conversations. As adults in schools, it is our job to care and to teach children. Listen to my last podcast if you want to unpack that word, children. So, knowing that it is part of the work is having these conversations with kids, here are my go-to strategies. First, I have found that reading a topical picture book, no matter what the grade, is a great entry point to conversation. I think we should be using picture books in education and conversation for all ages and grade levels, even adults. There's something so delightful about being able to communicate a message in a small amount of words, pages, and pictures. So, for example, there was a moment when there was some bullying happening at my school towards a student. And I knew that students in one of my classes were present and possibly involved with the bullying that was occurring. So I pulled out a book. It is called, insert title here. And I read it to my students at the start of class. I framed it as we're going to start today by reading a book. And I just want you to think about, what might this story mean for me? And we read the book, and as I read it aloud to students, I just asked them to please have their heads up, to be listening. I walked around the room so that all kids could see the images. And at the end of it, I think it was quite apparent to kids why I read the book. Rather than then taking the opportunity to berate or embarrass kids, I asked them to reflect on my initial question of how might this story relate or impact or be relevant to me, however you want to frame it. I asked them to write in their notebooks for 5 minutes, and I asked after that if there were any students brave enough to share on their reflections. A few brave students raised their hands, and as they were sharing, you just watched the faces around the room, and it's quite apparent that kids get it. Kids know what's happening. They know you know what's happening, and you don't have to spell out all the details to kids for them to have a learning or understand the message that you are trying to convey. My second tip is to offer a poem. This especially works well with high schoolers and adults. Find a poem that is topical, that is relevant. I have used this when there are situations that, unfortunately, as many of us have experienced as teachers, school shootings are a frequent occurrence. I say frequent because once a year is too frequent. And so when students came into class, I acknowledged that I know there was a school shooting yesterday in this place. I know that it is probably weighing on some of you, as some of you have come to talk to me already today. So I just wanted to take a minute to read a poem to give you some perspective. We'll just keep the lights low, read this poem, take a few deep breaths together, and then continue doing what we are privileged to do, which is be in school and learn. What we are lucky to do today. That is not to guilt kids, but that is to remind kids of the gravity of the situation, because the challenge with school shootings is how do we recognize the atrocity without just making it another day, another school shooting. So many of our kids have become unfeeling and immune to the weight of school shootings because it has become a norm. It has become a thing that is almost a given in public education in America. And so I wanted to bring light to the fact that I'm sure there are some big feelings that we're having about this, some challenging feelings, and let's recognize the gravity of this and not just write it off as another day, another headline. After the poem, after the few deep breaths together as a class, I also offered to students, if you would like to talk to me after class or come in at lunch, please do so. A lot of the time, simply taking a second to recognize this thing might be in your head or impacting you today goes a long way with kids. For some kids, they come into school very aware that that's happening inside their heads and their hearts. And for some kids, they come into school feeling some type of way and maybe unable to define what it is. And so being able to name a feeling and offer some words written by someone else that describe that feeling are a great way to just help kids better identify emotions and also to normalize that we do not have to be okay about certain things that are happening. We never have to be okay, but especially with these things that are directly impacting our kids' lives. My final recommendation for when the big things happen in life, in the world, when the hard things happen, depending on the situation, is to think about the question, well, what are we going to do about it? Not every situation may warrant this question or be appropriate for this question. But I think more often than not, we underestimate kids and their ability to think about problems and problem solve way more effectively than we can. And part of what I think is most crucial to innovating education is how do we bring student voice into everything we do, not just some things, some settings, not just once a month in a very controlled environment, but all the time. I have used this strategy of what can we do about it, specifically when there was a really big disruption to students' schedules. There were a few teachers who got displaced early in the school year due to enrollment numbers, and both of them were the grade level of my students. So some students were having 2 to 5 classes changed just because of these displacements, and kids were frustrated by it. They had gotten used to their classes, their teachers, and they were just not happy. So I took some time to ask kids, well, what can we do about it? What are some possible solutions? And while we're at it, why don't we just think about school in general? Like, what are the issues we're seeing and what do we want to do about it? What could we do about it? What are your ideas? And as usual, kids came up with a million very interesting ideas. I would say very good ideas, but I don't want to belittle teacher contracts or union contracts. Those are very important, and our students are not well versed on that. And so some of their ideas would not fly with our unions, but I think that they speak to some deeper values and insights of kids. So regarding this teacher displacement situation, one kid said, Well, why don't we ask students to, like, evaluate all the teachers at the school and give feedback on teachers, and then the lowest evaluated teachers are the ones who have to be displaced, and it's only up to the kids and their feedback. Again, union contracts. What is the key takeaway there? How are we eliciting student voice, and how are we honoring student voice with their experience with teachers? We could be using that information as we coach teachers, as we consider maybe some of the issues we're seeing with other students in other classes, looking for trends across time. All of that information could be going to the purpose of bettering teachers, with the belief that all teachers in schools are there for kids and desire to do what is right by kids. That brings me to the end of my commute, and I hope that as you show up for kids every day, and maybe even tomorrow, that you try one of these things when it comes to talking about hard things with kids. Reading a picture book, offering a poem, or asking students, what can we do about it? If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow the show so you don't miss what's next. Leaving a quick review really helps us reach more innovative educators. Join us next Tuesday.